All right, TalkTickers fans, today we're going to be really getting into Sanofi's Q3 2024 earnings call. And wow, there's so much to cover.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how Sanofi is, really becoming a biopharma powerhouse.
Yeah, absolutely.
This earnings call, gives us a real look into how they're growing and, the challenges that they're facing in healthcare today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a great place to start is with, the big name everyone's talking about, Dupixent.
Mm-hmm.
Pulled in a crazy 3.5 billion euros this quarter.
Yeah.
I mean, that is not, insignificant.
It's not, no. And what's even more impressive is that they're now reaching over 1 million patients worldwide.
Wow.
Which puts them on track to hit something like 13 billion euros for the whole year.
That's wild. And it doesn't seem like they're going to be slowing down anytime soon with these new approvals for COPD in the U.S. and China, two huge markets.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're projecting this low double-digit sales growth all the way through 2030, which I think is a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, for sure. Shows a lot of confidence. And I think this success, isn't just about Dupixent itself. It's about this, a bigger trend that we're seeing towards these specialized biologics.
Yeah, totally. I think it's really interesting how these highly targeted therapies are really changing how we treat chronic diseases.
Yeah, 100%. And speaking of revolutionary treatments, I think we have to talk about Bay Foris. Their, treatment for RSV in infants, it pulled in a really impressive 645 million euros.
It did, yeah. Especially considering it's only its first full year on the market.
Right.
They're projecting around 1.5 billion in sales for 2024, and the real-world evidence is really, really promising. 87% reduction in hospitalizations just in the U.S.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And speaking of keeping people healthy, let's switch gears a little bit to their vaccine game. Fluzone high dose, it's setting a new standard with this massive randomized controlled trial.
Right, and that trial was a big deal. It showed unequivocally that this was a better option than the standard flu shot.
Yeah, and that really sets them apart from some competitors who still, have to prove themselves in these large-scale trials.
Right.
It's interesting, though, because, they have this winning formula, yet overall flu sales are predicted to go down slightly for 2024.
Yeah, I think they're attributing that to lower vaccination rates overall.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even with a great product, market dynamics can always come into play.
For sure.
So we've talked about, some of the bigger names. What about the newcomers? The new medicines launched in the last 9 months have already brought in close to 3 billion euros.
No, they have. Yeah, it's really a testament to their ability to innovate.
Yeah.
Standouts include Alatu UVO for hemophilia, and some other ones like Nexviazyme, Rezurock, and Sarclisa. These are all doing better than expected.
It's an impressive lineup, but things are really getting shaken up because they're selling a controlling stake in Opella for a crazy 16 billion euros.
That's right. Yeah, it's a huge move.
Huge.
And I think it really shows their commitment to becoming a pure biopharma company, focused on science, really focused on that cutting edge.
Right. And investors are definitely, waiting to see what they're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
It should close in the second quarter of 2025.
Yeah.
And they've, hinted at share buybacks and some smaller acquisitions.
Right.
But, they're committed to keeping their strong credit rating.
Yeah, they are.
So last but not least, we got to take a peek into their pipeline. It is packed with multiple phase 3 readouts, submissions, and regulatory decisions all within the next 18 months.
Yeah, so many potential blockbusters in there.
So much to digest from this call. What are your top takeaways for our listeners? What should they really be thinking about after hearing all of this?
Well, I think Sanofi's making some bold moves. They're really dedicated to innovation. They're streamlining, where they're putting their focus. And it seems like they're really set on achieving sustainable growth in this, this crazy healthcare world that's constantly changing.
Yeah, it's a good point. They're definitely a company to watch. Now, I want to zero in on a couple of these products just to really break down why they're making waves. First up, Dupixent. Can you explain why it's become such a game changer for these chronic conditions?
Sure. So Dupixent targets this specific protein that's a big player in inflammation.
Okay.
And inflammation is, it's at the root of so many chronic conditions, atopic dermatitis, asthma, now COPD. And by blocking this protein, Dupixent can really get in there and reduce the inflammation and provide relief for patients.
And it's not just about treating symptoms, right?
No,
There's also a preventative element here.
absolutely, yeah. It's been shown to really prevent these these bad flare-ups and hospitalizations in these patients, and that's huge. Not just for their quality of life, but also for reducing the burden on the healthcare system overall.
Yeah, for sure. And during the call, they highlighted three key drivers behind Dupixent's growth. Can you remind us what those were?
Yeah, so the first one is the increasing use of these advanced therapies, within the pool of patients that are, they're eligible for these biologic treatments. Essentially, more and more people who qualify are opting for these biologics,
Yeah.
and these new companies that are coming into the market, they're also fueling this growth because it's raising awareness, and, people are becoming more open to these treatments.
So more options, greater awareness. It's leading to more people choosing these biologics like Dupixent.
Right, exactly.
Makes sense. What's the second driver?
The second driver is geographic expansion. So they're planning, around 30 new country launches by 2026 for Dupixent.
Wow.
So, taking this to new parts of the world, reaching even more patients.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
What's the third one?
The third driver is, I think, the most exciting one, and that's expanding it into new indications.
Right.
They're actively researching and developing Dupixent to be used for a wider range of conditions.
So they're strategically widening, the net of who can benefit from Dupixent.
That's right.
It already seems, it's so successful, but with these three drivers, it just seems like the potential is limitless.
It does, yeah. The momentum is undeniable. It's a major growth engine for Sanofi.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's not forget about Bay Foris.
Yeah.
It may be a newer product, but it's already making waves, and for good reason, I think. Before we get into why it's doing so well, can you remind us, what exactly is RSV and why is Bay Foris, such an important development?
Sure, yeah. So RSV, or respiratory syncytial virus, is this it's this common virus that usually just causes mild cold-like symptoms in adults.
Okay.
But for infants, it's a totally different story. It can cause serious complications, bronchiolitis, pneumonia. It's actually one of the leading causes of infant hospitalizations worldwide.
So it's something that maybe we don't think about as adults, but for these little ones, it can be really dangerous.
It is. It really is. Yeah.
And until recently, there haven't been very many, effective treatments for these severe cases, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, Bay Foris is a game changer.
Okay.
It's this monoclonal antibody that basically provides this passive immunity to RSV.
Right.
So it's delivering these pre-made antibodies to fight the virus immediately, instead of having to rely on the baby's developing immune system.
Right. That's a really key distinction.
Yeah.
And the results, like you said, they're compelling. 87% reduction in hospitalizations.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And, this reduction, it's a big step forward in infant health, not just for the babies, but it takes a lot of pressure off of, families and the healthcare system as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely seems like it's well on its way to becoming their next blockbuster.
It does.
They're projecting $1.5 billion in sales this year, which is incredible for such a new product.
It really is. And think about it. This is just the first full year on the market. The potential is huge, especially as more countries, approve it and adopt it. It could be a real shift in how we protect infants.
Yeah, it's not just about the sales figures. It's about the potential impact on a global scale.
Absolutely.
Now, one thing that I found interesting during the call was the discussion of flu zone high dose and this whole evolving landscape of flu vaccines.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure, yeah. So as we mentioned earlier, Fluzone high dose, it's the only one that's proven to be, more effective than the standard dose in this huge trial.
Right.
And that level of evidence, it's something that regulators are starting to really, really demand from the other vaccine manufacturers.
So they're really leading the pack when it comes to proven effectiveness.
They are.
But then you also mentioned that overall flu sales are projected to decline this year. What's causing that?
Well, Sanofi attributed it to lower vaccination rates, and we've seen this trend in recent years with all sorts of vaccines, and there's a lot of factors involved. There's hesitancy, there's misinformation, there's, this pandemic fatigue that we're all feeling.
It's a good point. It's a good reminder that even with, all these scientific advancements, overcoming these societal challenges is still really important.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now I want to shift gears a little bit and focus on their pipeline. They have some really exciting things in development.
They do.
I'd like to focus on two in particular: Terbrutnib for multiple sclerosis and Amlight Telmab for atopic dermatitis.
Yeah, great choices. Both of those are, really cutting-edge treatments for these really complex conditions.
Yeah, and so Terbrutnib is a BTK inhibitor. Can you explain, for our listeners what that means?
Sure, yeah. BTK, or Bruton's tyrosine kinase, is this it's this enzyme that's crucial for the immune system.
Yeah.
And in conditions like MS, the immune system is basically, attacking the body's own nervous system.
Right.
So by inhibiting BTK, Terbrutnib can calm down that overactive immune response.
So it's calming everything down.
Right. And that can hopefully slow the progression and reduce, how bad the symptoms are.
That would be a major breakthrough. Now, what about Amlight? It's for, atopic dermatitis. So this is this chronic skin condition with dry, itchy, and inflamed skin, right?
Right. Yeah, it's also known as eczema, and it can be a really rough condition for people who have it. It's not just dry skin. It can really, affect their life and cause a lot of emotional distress.
Yeah, for sure. And so Amlight targets a protein called OX40 ligand. What is that all about?
Yeah, so that protein is involved in this immune response that drives the inflammation in atopic dermatitis.
So like Terbrutnib, it's about modulating that immune system to bring that inflammation down.
Yeah.
What sets it apart from other atopic dermatitis treatments?
Well, early studies are suggesting that it might be able to induce long-term remission.
Wow.
In some patients.
Okay.
So that means, significant and lasting relief from the symptoms, even after they stop the treatment.
That's a big deal, because long-term remission is kind of the holy grail for a lot of these conditions.
It is.
And it would be a huge win for, patients that are struggling with atopic dermatitis.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, of course, it's still early for both of these drugs.
Yeah.
We need more data, but the early results are pretty promising.
Yeah, they are.
Now let's address one of the big elephants in the room, the divestiture of Opella. What is Opella exactly, and why is Sanofi getting rid of it?
So Opella is their consumer healthcare business. So it's a lot of over-the-counter products.
Got it.
Big brands: Allegra, Dulcolax, Icy Hot.
Okay, so it's all the stuff you see in the drugstore.
Yeah, exactly. And, while it's been a profitable part of their business,
right,
they've decided to really focus on becoming this pure play biopharma company.
So they're really like streamlining and honing in on what they're really good at.
Absolutely. Yeah. And by selling Opella, it frees up resources, it frees up capital that they can invest in the biopharma pipeline.
Right. And so that sale price is, nothing to scoff at. 16 billion euros is a significant chunk of change. What are they planning to do with all that cash?
Well, they've mentioned a few things: share buybacks, some smaller acquisitions to complement their current portfolio, and of course investing more in their pipeline. But they've also said they're committed to keeping a strong credit rating. So, I think we can expect a pretty balanced approach.
Right. So are there any downsides to this divestiture? Are there any risks involved?
Well, sure. I mean, every strategic move has its risks.
Right.
I think one potential downside is that they're losing, this stable stream of revenue from Opella, right?
Right.
The consumer healthcare business tends to be, less volatile than pharmaceuticals. So, some investors might be concerned about the loss of that diversification.
That's a good point. But then on the flip side, this can be seen as a sign of confidence in their biopharma business.
Absolutely, yeah. It shows that they really believe in their ability to grow and innovate.
So it's a calculated risk, and we'll have to see how it plays out.
Exactly.
All right, well, looking ahead then, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities facing Sanofi in the next few years?
Well, one of the biggest challenges, and it's not just for Sanofi, it's for the whole industry, is drug pricing.
Yeah, for sure.
Governments and payers are always looking for ways to cut costs.
Right.
And so that puts pressure on, pharma companies to really justify, what they're charging.
So it's not just about, developing these innovative drugs, it's also about proving their value.
Right. And that takes a lot. You need strong clinical data, you need to show real world outcomes, and you need to be transparent about, how you're pricing these things.
So it's a really complex landscape.
It is.
What about opportunities then?
Well, as we've talked about, their specialty care portfolio with Dupixent and Bay Foris, that's a huge engine for growth.
Right.
They're also doing some really great work in immunology. They've got a really promising pipeline for things like atopic dermatitis, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease.
Right. And let's not forget about their vaccine business. I mean, they have such a history of success in that area.
They do, yeah, and they continue to innovate with things like that new 21-valent pneumococcal vaccine.
Right, and they've shown, that they can be agile. Like with the COVID-19 vaccines, they were able to respond to, these new threats.
Absolutely.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier about Sanofi's commitment to ESG. Can you explain that a little bit more for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term?
Yeah, so ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. So it's a framework for figuring out, how sustainable a company is and their ethical impact.
Okay.
And Sanofi has been really vocal about their commitment to these principles.
Right.
In this call, they talked about how they're working to make sure all their employees are earning a living wage, and they're even trying to extend that commitment to their supply chain partners.
Wow, that's really impressive.
It is, and it shows that they're not just thinking about profits; they're really thinking about their impact on society.
Yeah, it's really walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been such a fascinating deep dive into Sanofi's Q3 earnings call. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we move on?
Well, I think it's clear that Sanofi is a company that's really transforming. They're making some bold choices. They're investing heavily in research and development. And their focus is really on, making a difference in the lives of patients.
They're definitely one to watch in the biopharma space. Now, before we move on, I have a question for you. With all this cash from the Opella deal, do you think that they can actually, deliver on this ambitious pipeline and really become a leader in the biopharma world?
That's the billion-euro question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, they certainly have the resources, they have the drive, but success in pharmaceuticals, it's never a guarantee.
No.
Drug development is a long and risky process, and there are always going to be challenges that we don't see coming.
But based on what we've seen today, they seem to be on the right track.
I think so. Yeah, they've made a lot of progress, and they're really focused on innovation and keeping the patient at the center of things, which is a good sign.
That's a good point. Well, this is a story that's just beginning to unfold.
It is,
and we'll be watching closely to see how it all plays out. Now, for our TalkTickers listeners who may be thinking about investing in Sanofi, what's the biggest takeaway they should keep in mind?
I think the main takeaway is that Sanofi is making this, really big bet on their biopharma future.
Okay.
They're getting rid of things that aren't part of that core, like Opella, and they're really focusing on what they do best, creating those innovative drugs and vaccines.
So they're laser focused.
Yeah.
And their success with things like Dupixent, Bay Foris, and their leadership in the flu vaccine market, those are all pretty strong indicators that they understand what the market needs.
They do.
And they know how to meet those needs.
Yeah, I think so.
But of course, every investment comes with risks. What are some things that potential investors should keep in mind?
Well, the pharmaceutical industry, it's inherently risky. Developing new drugs is a long and costly process. There's no guarantee of success. Even the most promising drugs can they can fail in trials, or they can hit these regulatory roadblocks.
So it's just a reminder that, you need to be comfortable with a certain amount of risk
Absolutely.
if you're going to invest in this industry.
Right.
But Sanofi seems to be managing those risks, pretty effectively. They have a diverse portfolio of products. They've got a strong pipeline with, some potential blockbusters in there. And they've shown that they can, bring these new treatments to patients.
Yeah, they have.
They're not just sitting back. They're investing. They're exploring new partnerships. They're expanding into new markets.
That's right.
And they're embracing these ESG principles, which, like we said, is becoming increasingly important.
It is.
So it sounds like they're doing a lot of things right.
I think so.
But ultimately, the decision to invest is a personal one based on, your own individual risk tolerance and your investment goals.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think potential investors should, they should really do their research,
For sure.
weigh the risks and rewards, and make sure they're making a decision that makes sense for them.
That's great advice. Well, TalkTickers listeners, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've really gotten into Sanofi's Q3 earnings call. We've analyzed their strategies. We've looked at their blockbuster drugs and the promising things that are in their pipeline. And we've even touched on some of the bigger trends that are, impacting the whole pharmaceutical industry. So I hope you found this deep dive insightful and helpful.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights.
And as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to stay informed, do your research, and make those investment decisions that make sense for you and your goals. Thanks for joining us on TalkTickers. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a major earnings call. Until then, stay tuned and happy investing.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I think the key takeaway here is that, Sanofi is really betting on their future in biopharma.
It seems like they're, really, really zeroing in on what they're good at.
Yeah, exactly. And, there's success stories with Dupixent, with these chronic conditions, Bay Foris protecting those infants from RSV and, really being a leader in the flu vaccine market. It shows that they really understand, what the healthcare needs are.
Yeah.
And they know how to address them.
Absolutely. But as with any investment, there are always risks involved. What are some things that the potential investor should keep in mind?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry it's inherently risky, right? Developing these new drugs it's costly. It takes a lot of time, and there's no guarantee that it's going to work out.
Right.
Even drugs that seem really promising, they can fail in the trials, or they can, run into problems with regulators.
It's a high stakes.
It really is. But, I think Sanofi seems to be managing these risks pretty well.
Yeah.
They've got a diverse portfolio. They've got this robust pipeline, full of potential blockbusters, and they've shown that they can actually, bring these innovative treatments to market.
Yeah, and they're not just sitting back and relaxing. They're still investing in R&D. They're looking at new partnerships and they're expanding into new markets.
Right, and they're embracing those ESG principles, which, as we talked about, that's becoming really important for a lot of investors who, want to make sure that their investments are aligning with their values.
It sounds like they're checking all the right boxes.
Yeah, I think so.
But ultimately, like you said, the decision to invest is a personal one.
It is.
It depends on, your own risk tolerance, your investment goals, all that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think potential investors should, do their homework.
Right.
Think carefully about, the risks, the potential rewards, and just make sure that it's the right decision for them and their strategy.
That's great advice. Now let's zoom back in on something that I found really interesting. This idea of a living wage that Sanofi's committed to.
Yeah.
They seem to be going above and beyond, what's legally required.
They really are, and it's a big statement. They've adopted the Fair Wage Network's standards.
Okay.
Which, guarantees that the wages are higher than what's required locally.
Right.
So that means that, all of their employees, no matter where they are or what they do, they're earning a wage that allows them to, to live with dignity.
That's inspiring. I think it really speaks to, their values and their commitment to social responsibility.
It does. It really does. And it goes even beyond, their own employees. They're trying to extend this commitment to their key suppliers.
That's a big deal.
It is, because a lot of times the workers that are the most vulnerable are the ones that are, in these complex supply chains where there can be a lot of, exploitation and low wages.
So they're using their power to promote a more ethical and equitable supply chain.
Exactly. They're recognizing that their responsibility doesn't stop, at their own door.
Yeah.
They need to make sure that everyone involved is being treated fairly.
It's a great example of how these ESG principles can actually be, put into practice.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about, their financial performance. They had some really strong results this quarter.
They did.
Underlying growth of about 11%.
Yeah.
What were some of the key drivers of that growth?
Well, as we've discussed, Dupixent and Bay Foris, those are the superstars right now. Both of those are experiencing this, phenomenal growth, a lot of demand, and the fact that they're, being approved for new indications.
Right. And it seems like their new product launches are also contributing quite a bit.
Yeah, they are. In the first 9 months of this year, their new medicines brought in almost 3 billion euros.
Wow.
Which, really shows their ability to develop new drugs and bring them to market.
Absolutely. Are there any areas of concern when it comes to their financial performance?
Well, I mean, there are always challenges in this industry, right?
Right.
I think one thing to watch is, the impact of generics
Okay.
on some of their older products. As patents expire, they're going to need to find ways to make up for those losses.
So it's this balancing act between, maintaining the revenue from the existing products and then driving growth with the new ones.
Exactly. It takes a lot of, strategic thinking to manage that portfolio and make sure that they're bringing new things to market.
Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the Opella divestiture. While it makes sense, strategically to really focus on biopharma, this sale is going to have a pretty big impact on their financials. How are they addressing that?
Yeah, so they've been really transparent about, the potential short-term impacts. They're anticipating that revenue and earnings might dip a little bit in the next year.
Okay.
Because they're not going to have Opella's contributions anymore.
Right.
But, they're also really emphasizing the long-term benefits. They're confident that this move is going to lead to stronger growth in the biopharma space.
Okay.
They're already seeing the operating margins improve, and they expect that to continue.
So short-term pain, long-term gain.
Exactly.
Now, investors always want to know how a company is going to use their money, and with all this cash from the Opella sale, they've got a lot of options. What have they said about their, capital allocation priorities?
Well, they've outlined a pretty balanced approach. They're prioritizing investments in R&D, strategic acquisitions, and returns to shareholders.
Oh,
They
wow.
they specifically mentioned share buybacks as a way to offset the dilution from the Opella sale and give some value back to the shareholders.
So trying to keep everybody happy.
All right, finding that sweet spot between investing in the future and rewarding the current shareholders.
It's a tough balance.
It is.
Okay, so let's revisit the competitive landscape a little bit. The pharmaceutical industry is, notoriously competitive. What are some of the key pressures that Sanofi is facing?
Well, as we've talked about, drug pricing is a huge one.
Right.
Governments and payers are really scrutinizing those prices. And so companies have to, they have to compete on value, not just, coming up with something new.
So it's not enough to just, make a groundbreaking drug. You have to prove that it's worth the price tag.
Right. And that means understanding the healthcare landscape, what patients need, what payers are looking for. It's a really complex situation.
How does Sanofi stack up against, the competition in this environment?
Well, Sanofi is a big player. They've got a long history of innovation,
Right.
but they've got tough competition from other big pharma companies.
Yeah, it's a constant race.
It is. It takes a lot of investment in R&D. You need that global reach. You need a strong commercial infrastructure. It's tough.
So before we wrap up our discussion on Sanofi, I want to talk about something that I think is often overlooked, and that's the role of partnerships and collaborations in this industry.
Yeah.
Sanofi has a long history of partnering with other companies and institutions. Why are these partnerships so important?
Well, I think they're crucial for a few reasons. First of all, they give companies access to expertise and technology that they might not have themselves.
So it's like, they don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Exactly. Yeah. And second, these partnerships can help share the risks and the costs of developing these drugs, which, as we talked about, it's really expensive.
Yeah, it's a smart way to, spread the risk a little bit.
It is. And third, these partnerships can open doors to new markets and new ways to get their products out there, which is, really important if you're trying to be a global company.
So it sounds like it could be a win-win for everybody involved.
It can if it's structured well, and Sanofi's got a good track record of successful partnerships. They've worked with, universities, biotech companies, other big pharma companies to bring, new treatments to patients.
Okay, so let's zoom out a little bit and talk about the bigger trends that are shaping the industry.
Okay.
What are some of the key forces that are, driving change in the pharmaceutical world?
Well, I think one of the most significant trends is this rise of personalized medicine.
Go ahead.
This idea of tailoring treatments to individual patients,
Right.
based on their genes, based on, other factors. It's really moving away from this, one size fits all approach to medicine.
So it's recognizing that everybody's different.
Exactly. And personalized medicine, it has the potential to really change healthcare, but it also presents some challenges for companies.
Right.
They need to develop these new diagnostic tools. They need to figure out, who are the specific patients that are going to benefit from this. And then they have to, convince the payers that it's worth it.
So it's a whole new way of thinking about developing drugs and getting them out there.
It is. And another big trend is the increasing use of digital technology in healthcare.
Right.
Telemedicine, wearable devices, artificial intelligence, all of that.
So technology is becoming a really important tool in the healthcare world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's changing how we deliver and receive healthcare. And it's also creating new opportunities for companies,
Right.
To connect with patients, to gather data, to develop those personalized treatments.
These are exciting times to be in the pharmaceutical industry.
They are.
There are challenges, but there's also so much potential.
There is.
So I think we've covered a lot of ground with Sanofi. Any final thoughts for our listeners before we move on?
Yeah, I think Sanofi is a company in transition.
Okay.
But they're making these big moves, and they've got a clear vision. They're investing in R&D. They're streamlining their operations, and they're really embracing those ESG principles. So, it's a company worth watching, and we'll be following them closely to see, what happens.
Absolutely. All right. Well, before we move on to our next deep dive, let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Stay tuned. Welcome back, TalkTickers listeners. We're wrapping up our deep dive into Sanofi's Q3 2024 earnings call. And, I have to say, I'm really impressed with their forward-thinking approach.
Yeah, I agree. They're really strategically positioning themselves to thrive in this biopharma world that's constantly changing.
Now, you mentioned, Sanofi's focus on partnerships as a key strategy.
Yeah.
I think, let's unpack that a little bit further. Why are these collaborations so crucial in the pharmaceutical industry?
Well, I think, partnerships they're essential for a bunch of reasons. For one, they give companies access to this expertise, to these technologies that they might not have in-house.
Right. So they don't have to build everything from scratch.
Exactly. And it's not just about the knowledge. It's also about, sharing the risks and the costs of developing these drugs, which, as we've talked about, it's incredibly expensive, and the failure rate is really high.
Yeah. So it's a way to kind of hedge your bets.
Yeah, exactly. And on top of all of that, these partnerships can open doors to new markets, new ways to distribute their products, which is crucial if you're trying to be a global player.
Yeah, so it sounds like a win-win for everybody involved.
It can be, yeah, if it's done right. And Sanofi has a really good track record here. They've worked with universities, they've worked with biotech companies, they've worked with other big pharma companies to bring these innovative treatments to market.
They're not afraid to team up with the best and the brightest.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, so now let's zoom out a little bit, and talk about the bigger picture. What are some of the big trends that are really like shaping the pharmaceutical industry as a whole?
I think, one of the most significant trends is this rise of personalized medicine.
Right, right.
This idea that we're moving away from this one size fits all approach, and we're starting to tailor treatments to individual patients based on their genes, based on, other
So
factors.
recognizing that everybody's different.
Exactly. And personalized medicine, it has the potential to completely revolutionize healthcare, but it also presents these new challenges. Companies have to develop these diagnostic tools. They have to, figure out who are the right patients for these treatments, and then they have to, convince the people who are paying for it that it's worth it.
It's a whole new way of developing these drugs and getting them out there.
It really is, yeah.
Yeah.
And another big trend is the use of digital technology.
Right.
In healthcare, everything from telemedicine to wearable devices to artificial intelligence.
Right. So technology is becoming a really powerful tool in healthcare.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's changing how we deliver healthcare, how we receive healthcare. And it's also creating all these new opportunities for these companies to connect with patients, to gather data, and to develop these more personalized treatments.
So it's really an exciting time to be in this industry.
It is. There are challenges, but there's so much potential.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess as we wrap up this episode of Talk Tickers, the big question is, what's the main takeaway for our listeners who are maybe thinking about adding Sanofi to their portfolio?
Yeah, I think what really stands out to me is that Sanofi is making this this big bold bet on the future of medicine. They're doubling down on biopharma. They're selling off things that aren't part of that, like Opella, and they're just focusing on what they do best, which is creating these innovative drugs and vaccines.
So they're really honed in.
Exactly. And their track record speaks for itself. We've talked about Dupixent, we've talked about Bay Foris. They're a leader in the flu vaccine market, and I think that really shows that they understand what the market needs, and they know how to deliver.
But of course, every investment comes with risks. What are some things that potential investors should be thinking about when it comes to Sanofi?
Yeah, that's a really important point. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry, it's inherently risky. Developing new drugs, it's expensive, it takes a long time, and there's no guarantee that it's going to work. Even the drugs that seem really promising, they can fail in the clinical trials, or they can run into problems with the regulators.
Right. So it's a reminder that you need to be comfortable with some level of risk if you're going to invest in this space.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. But I think Sanofi is doing a good job of managing that risk. They have a diverse portfolio. They have a really strong pipeline, and they've shown that they can actually, bring these new treatments to market.
And they're not slowing down. They're continuing to invest. They're exploring new partnerships. They're expanding into new markets.
That's right.
And they're embracing those ESG principles, which, like we said, is really important these days.
It is. It is.
So it sounds like overall they're doing a lot of things right.
I think so.
Yeah. But like you said, ultimately the decision to invest is a personal one. It depends on your individual risk tolerance and your goals.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think potential investors should do their research. They should carefully consider the risks, the potential rewards, and then, make a decision that fits with their overall strategy.
That's great advice. Well, TalkTickers listeners, we've covered a lot of ground today. We've dissected Sanofi's Q3 earnings call. We've analyzed their strategies, their blockbuster drugs, their pipeline. We've even talked about some of the bigger trends in the pharmaceutical industry. I hope you found this deep dive insightful, informative, and helpful.
It's been a pleasure. Yeah.
And as always, we encourage you, our listeners, to stay informed. Do your own research and make those investment decisions that make sense for you, for your goals, for your risk tolerance. So thanks for joining us on Talk Tickers. We'll be back next week with another in-depth look at a major earnings call. Until then, stay tuned and happy investing.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on.